Hello, my dear children. Come, sit with me for a while. I know you're tired. I know life has been hard. On you too. Today, I want to tell you a story that changed my life forever. A story about loss, about betrayal, about a love that never truly died, and about a promise that waited 70 years to find me. My name is Margaret, and I'm 76 years old now. But this story begins when I was 73, broken, hungry, and living in a room smaller than most people's closets. Before we begin, I want you to know something. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been abandoned by the people you loved most, if you've ever wondered how you'll survive another day, then this story is for you. So take a deep breath, settle in and listen. Because what happened to me, it could happen to you too. 3 years ago, my world fell apart. My husband, Thomas, died of pancreatic cancer. He was only 53 years old. 53. Can you imagine? We were supposed to grow old together, him and me. We were supposed to sit on our porch in Philadelphia, watching the sunset, drinking sweet tea. But cancer doesn't care about your plans. Took him in 4 months. 4 months from diagnosis to death. I watched the man I loved for 32 years waste away to nothing. His strong hands, the ones that used to hold me so tight, they became thin and fragile like paper. His laugh, oh God, his beautiful laugh. It disappeared. Replaced by coughing, by pain, by silence. When he died that cold February morning, I thought my heart would stop too. I wanted it to stop. But it didn't. It just kept beating, and I had to keep living. Now Thomas and we had 2 daughters, Rebecca and Caroline. I raised those girls with everything I had. I sacrificed, I worked 2 jobs sometimes, I went without so they could have. I thought they loved me. I really did. But 2 weeks after we buried their father, they came to the house. Our little house in South Philadelphia. The one Thomas and I bought 40 years ago. They sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd had 1,000 family dinners. And Rebecca, my oldest, she said the words that broke me. "Mom," she said, not looking at me, "the house is in Dad's name and it's going to us now." I stared at her. I didn't understand. Caroline, my baby, she nodded along. "We need to sell it, Mom," she said. "We have bills, we have mortgages, we have our own families to take care of." "But," I whispered, "where will I live?" Rebecca shrugged. Like I was asking her what we should have for dinner, not where her mother was supposed to sleep. "You'll figure it out, Mom," she said. "You get Social Security, right? Find a cheap apartment somewhere." My Social Security check was $387 a month. $387. That barely covered food for 2 weeks, let alone rent. I told them that. I begged them. But they didn't care. Within a month I was out, standing on the sidewalk with 2 suitcases and a broken heart, watching strangers walk through the door of my home. Now let me ask you something, my dear ones. Have you ever been abandoned by your own children? Have you ever felt that kind of betrayal? If you have, please leave a comment below. Tell me your story. Because I know I'm not alone. And neither are you. I found a room in West Philadelphia. A terrible, awful room in a building that smelled like mold and garbage. It cost $275 a month. That left me with about $100 for food. The room was tiny, maybe 8 feet by 10 feet. The walls were stained yellow from years of cigarette smoke. There was a hot plate, a mini refrigerator that buzzed so loud I couldn't sleep, and a mattress on the floor with springs that poked into my back. The bathroom was down the hall, shared with 4 other people. I was 73 years old and I was living like this. The nights were the worst. I would lie there in the dark, listening to the neighbors screaming at each other through the thin walls, listening to the rats scratching inside the walls. And I would cry. I would cry and cry and cry until I had no tears left. I thought about Thomas every single day. I wondered if he could see me from wherever he was. I wondered if he knew what our daughters had done to me. I wondered if he was disappointed that I couldn't be stronger. But hunger, you see, hunger doesn't care about your dignity. After 3 weeks of eating nothing but crackers and canned soup, I knew I had to do something. So I signed up to drive for a rideshare company. Yes, me, a 73-year-old widow with arthritis in my knees and hands, driving strangers around Philadelphia just to buy food. They approved me in 2 days, gave me a sticker for my windshield and said, "Good luck." That was it. The first day I almost crashed 3 times. My hands shook on the wheel. People were rude, impatient, constantly staring at their phones. Nobody looked at me. Nobody saw me. I was just the old lady driving them from point A to point B. I worked 12 hours a day, sometimes 14, from 6 in the morning until 8 at night. My legs swelled up so bad I could barely walk by the end of the day. My back screamed in pain, but I couldn't stop. Every ride was $3, $5, maybe $7 if I was lucky. I stopped buying anything except rice, beans, and cheap white bread. No coffee, no meat, no fruit. Just the bare minimum to survive. Sundays were torture. Thomas and I used to go to church together every Sunday. Then we'd come home and I'd make a big roast chicken dinner. Rebecca and Caroline would come over with their families. The house would be full of laughter, full of love. Now, Sundays were just another day of picking up strangers, listening to happy families talking about their brunches, their vacations, their plans, and me dying a little more inside with every ride. 5 months passed like this. 5 months of loneliness, exhaustion, and despair. I didn't get a single phone call from my daughters. Not one. It was like I had died along with Thomas. There were nights when I thought about giving up. Really giving up. But something, maybe Thomas's memory, maybe God, maybe just stubbornness, kept me going. Now here's where my story takes a turn. A turn so unbelievable, so impossible, that even now I sometimes think I dreamed it. Are you still with me, my dear ones? If you are, if this story is touching your heart, would you do me a favor? Hit that like button. Subscribe to Grandma Margaret's channel, because I promise you what comes next will blow your mind. It was a Thursday afternoon in July. Hot, sticky, the kind of Philadelphia heat that makes the air shimmer. I got a ride request. Pick up at Jefferson University Hospital, destination Center City. Short trip, maybe $12. I needed every penny, so I accepted. I drove to the hospital and waited at the main entrance. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I was about to cancel when an elderly gentleman came through the doors. He was probably my age, maybe older, leaning heavily on a beautiful wooden cane that looked antique. He wore an expensive gray suit, perfectly pressed, a silk tie, polished shoes. Everything about him screamed money, class, privilege. I got out to help him, opened the back door, extended my hand. He looked up at me, and in that instant everything changed. His face went completely white. His eyes, pale gray eyes, went wide with shock. His mouth fell open. The cane started trembling in his hand. For a second I thought he was having a heart attack. "Sir," I said. "Sir, are you okay? Do you need a doctor?" But he didn't answer. He just stared at me like he'd seen a ghost. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "What's your last name?" I was confused. "My name is Margaret," I said. "Margaret Hastings." "Hastings," he repeated, and tears started rolling down his cheeks. Real tears. "Hastings. Did you know a man named Daniel Hastings?" My heart stopped. Daniel Hastings was Thomas's father. My father-in-law, who died 45 years ago. "Yes," I said slowly. "Daniel was my husband's father. But he's been gone a long time." The old man closed his eyes and more tears fell. "Oh my God," he whispered. "Oh my God, I found you. After 70 years, I finally found you." I had no idea what he was talking about. I'd never seen this man before in my life. But he was crying, really crying, and he was looking at me like I was some kind of miracle. "Please," he said, his voice shaking. "Please don't take me to my original destination. Take me to my office. I need to show you something. Something I've been keeping for 70 years, waiting for this moment." I should have said no. I should have driven away. But something in his eyes, something desperate and honest, made me nod. "Okay," I said. "I'll take you." He gave me an address in Center City, one of those tall glass buildings where rich people work. During the drive, neither of us spoke. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, trying to understand what was happening. He stared out the window, tears still on his cheeks, lost in memories I couldn't see. Traffic was bad, but finally we arrived. I pulled up in front of a 25-story building, all glass and steel. He asked me to turn off the engine and come inside with him. Every instinct told me this was crazy, but I was curious. And honestly, I was desperate for anything at all that might change my miserable life. So I helped him out of the car. We walked together through the lobby, all marble floors and fancy plants. A security guard greeted him by name very respectfully. "Good afternoon, Mr. Patterson," the guard said. We took an elevator to the 20th floor. It opened directly into a private office. No hallway, no waiting room. Just a solid wooden door with a gold plaque. "Harold Patterson, Chairman." He unlocked the door and motioned me inside. The office was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the whole city. A massive desk made of dark wood. Shelves filled with leather books. Paintings on the walls. Everything screamed success, power, old money. I felt completely out of place in my cheap clothes and worn-out shoes. "Please sit," he said, pointing to a leather couch. I sat down slowly, my heart pounding. He walked to the corner of the room where a large painting hung. A beautiful landscape of mountains and trees. He took it down carefully, revealing a safe built into the wall. An old safe, the kind from decades ago, with a combination dial. He looked at me before opening it. "What I'm about to show you," he said, "has been waiting in here for 70 years. 70 years I've searched for your family. And today, by some miracle, you got into my car." He turned back to the safe and started turning the dial. Left, right, left again. I could hear the clicks. My hands were shaking. Finally, the door swung open with a rusty creak. He reached inside and pulled out an old leather folder, worn and faded. He set it on his desk and motioned for me to come closer. I stood up on trembling legs and walked over. He opened the folder carefully. Inside were old documents yellowed with age, black and white photographs, and what looked like old stock certificates. He pulled out a photograph and handed it to me. It showed two young men standing in front of a small factory. One of them was clearly him, maybe 50 years younger, with dark hair and a big smile. The other man made my breath catch in my throat. He looked exactly like Thomas. The same eyes, the same nose, the same smile. "Who is that?" I whispered, though I already knew. "That's Daniel Hastings," he said softly. "Your father-in-law." This photo was taken in 1955. I sank into the chair because my legs wouldn't hold me anymore. "Let me pause here, my dear ones, and ask you something. Have you ever had a moment where your entire life changed in an instant? Where everything you thought you knew just shifted? Drop a comment below and tell me. I want to hear your stories. Because what happened next I still can't fully believe. Harold Patterson sat down across from me and started talking. His voice was soft but clear, telling me a story he'd kept for 7 decades. In 1955, he said, he was a 28-year-old man who'd inherited a small textile factory from his father. The factory was failing. He'd made bad decisions, trusted the wrong partners, taken on debt he couldn't pay. The banks wouldn't help him. Creditors were threatening to take everything. He was about to lose it all. One night, desperate and depressed, he went to a bar near the factory. That's where he met Daniel Hastings. Daniel was a mechanic who worked at a garage across the street. A simple, hard-working man with grease under his fingernails and holes in his shirt. But he had kind eyes. Harold, drunk and broken, spilled his whole story to this stranger. The debt, the threats, the impending bankruptcy. And Daniel, this mechanic he just met, did something Harold never forgot. He offered him money. His life savings. $25,000 he'd been saving for years to buy a house for his family. Harold thought it was a joke. Nobody does that. Nobody gives their life savings to a stranger in a bar. But Daniel was serious. 2 days later, they met at a bank. Daniel withdrew every penny he had and handed it to Harold in cash. $25,000 in 1955. That's like $200,000 today. Everything Daniel had. Harold was overwhelmed. He promised Daniel that he wouldn't just pay him back with interest. He promised to give him 25% ownership of the company. They wrote it on a napkin, signed it, shook hands. Daniel said he trusted him, that they didn't need lawyers or fancy contracts. Harold used that money to save the factory, paid off the most urgent debts, renegotiated with creditors, landed new contracts. Within 6 months, the business was making money again. Within 2 years, it had tripled in size. Harold went back to find Daniel to keep his promise. But Daniel was gone. The garage said he'd quit 3 months earlier. Nobody knew where he'd moved. Harold searched everywhere. Hired private detectives, placed ads in newspapers, offered rewards. Nothing. It was like Daniel Hastings had vanished. Years passed. The company grew and grew, became one of the biggest textile manufacturers in America. But Harold never sold those shares. He kept them in this safe waiting for the day he could find Daniel or his family. 70 years. 70 years of searching. And today I'd gotten into his car. Harold opened one of the documents and showed it to me. A stock certificate in Daniel Hastings' name. 25% ownership of Patterson Textiles Corporation. Then he showed me another document. A recent valuation. And when I saw the number I couldn't breathe. $28 million. $28 million. That's what those shares were worth today. $28 million that had been sitting in this safe for 70 years, waiting for Daniel's family. I stared at the paper, and the numbers swam before my eyes. It couldn't be real. It had to be a mistake, a scam, a cruel joke. But the documents were official, with lawyers' signatures and seals. I don't understand, I whispered. Why didn't Daniel ever come back for this? Harold shook his head sadly. I've thought about that for 70 years, he said. Maybe he was afraid of the money. Maybe something happened that forced him to leave. Maybe he just didn't care about becoming rich. He was that kind of man, you see. He helped me because it was the right thing to do, not because he expected anything back. I thought about Thomas's stories of his father. Daniel had died when Thomas was just 8 years old, a heart attack at 42. Thomas barely remembered him, just fragments. A man who worked with his hands, who came home tired and dirty every night. A man who never complained. A man Thomas said was the most honest person he'd ever known. And now I was learning that this man, this mechanic, had saved a stranger's entire life with everything he had. Why did you keep looking? I asked Harold. After all these years, why not just give up? Harold's eyes filled with tears again. Because I made a promise, he said. A man without his word is nothing. Everything I have, everything I've built, I owe to your father-in-law. Without his $25,000 in 1955, I would have lost everything. He gave me a second chance when nobody else would. The only way to honor that was to keep my promise, no matter how long it took. Now, my dear ones, let me ask you something. What would you do in this situation? Would you trust it? Would you believe it? Comment below because I want to know. Are you from the United States? Are you from somewhere else? Tell me where you're watching from. And if you're still watching, if this story has you on the edge of your seat, please hit that subscribe button. Join Grandma Margaret's family, because I share these stories to remind you that miracles can happen, even when everything seems lost. Harold called his secretary. A woman named Elizabeth came in with a tablet. He gave her instructions quietly, and she left. I'm calling my legal team, he explained. We need to transfer these shares to you officially. It'll take a couple weeks for all the paperwork, but I promise you, everything will be done properly. I couldn't speak. I just sat there trembling. $28 million. I who had been living on $100 a month. I who ate nothing but rice and beans. I who slept in a room that smelled like mold. I was suddenly a millionaire. But strangely, that wasn't what I felt most. What I felt was sadness. Deep, crushing sadness for Daniel, for Thomas, for never knowing this story while they were alive. Harold seemed to understand. Your father-in-law was a hero, he said gently. Not because of the money, but because of his character. because he saw someone in need and helped without hesitation. That's rare. That's beautiful. And that legacy lives on through your husband, through you. He asked if he could keep one copy of the photograph. I said of course. He gave me the original, this picture of Daniel and him from 70 years ago. Two young men who had no idea they were creating a story that would last a lifetime. An attorney arrived, a man named Gregory Walsh. He had paperwork, lots of it. We spent 2 hours going through forms, identification requirements, DNA testing to prove I was connected to Daniel. They'd get samples from hospital records where Daniel had been treated before he died. It would take about 10 days for results. In the meantime, Harold authorized an immediate payment. $40,000 deposited into my account the next day to cover any immediate needs. When Gregory said that, I almost fainted. $40,000. More money than I'd seen in my entire life at once. Harold stood up with difficulty, leaning on his cane. He extended his hand to me. When I took it, he covered it with his other hand. "Thank you," he said, tears in his eyes. "Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being Daniel's family. I've carried this debt in my heart for 70 years. Every success felt incomplete because I couldn't repay the man who made it all possible. Now finally I can die in peace." My voice broke when I tried to respond. "No," I said. "Thank you. Thank you for keeping your promise. Thank you for honoring my father-in-law all these years." He shook his head. "This isn't generosity," he said. "This is justice. This is fulfilling a promise that should have been kept 70 years ago." I left that office in a daze, walked back to my car, which was still parked at the hospital. People rushed past me. Ambulances screamed by. Life continued normally for everyone. But for me, everything had changed. I sat in my car for a long time, just holding that photograph of Daniel, looking at that young man who looked so much like Thomas, trying to understand the magnitude of what had just happened. The next morning I checked my bank account. $40,000. Right there, real and available. I went to the bank and withdrew $2,000 in cash, just to feel it in my hands to make it real. Then I went to a real restaurant, ordered a full breakfast, eggs and bacon and fresh orange juice and real coffee. And when it came, I cried into my plate, because it had been so long since I'd had a real meal. So long since I'd felt like a human being instead of just an old woman barely surviving. I bought new clothes. Nothing fancy, just clean, decent clothes that fit properly. I looked at myself in the store mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. Over the next 2 weeks, my life transformed. The DNA results came back positive. 99.9% confirmation that I was Thomas's widow and Daniel's daughter-in-law. The legal team worked quickly. Gregory Walsh called me every few days with updates. Everything was proceeding smoothly. No problems, no complications. And then one afternoon Gregory called with sad news. Harold Patterson had passed away. Peacefully at home, surrounded by family. The cancer had finally won. But Gregory said Harold died happy. He'd fulfilled his promise. He'd found the Hastings family. His last words, Gregory told me, were, "Thank you, Daniel. Thank you. Thank you for saving my life." I hung up and cried for a man I'd known for only 2 hours. A man who had completely changed my life. A man who'd kept a promise for 70 years. 3 days later, I went to Gregory's office for the final transfer. More papers to sign, more forms to fill out. And finally it was done. I was officially the owner of 25% of Patterson Textiles Corporation, worth $28 million. Gregory explained my options. I could sell all the shares immediately, get the cash. Or I could keep them and receive annual dividends about $1.7 million every year. Or I could do a combination, sell some and keep some. I chose the middle path. Sold half for $14 million in cash. Kept the other half for the annual income. Gregory helped me find a financial advisor. A woman named Susan Chan who specialized in helping people manage sudden wealth. She was patient, kind, didn't talk down to me. She set up everything: investments, accounts, protections. Within a month, my life was completely different. I moved into a beautiful apartment in Rittenhouse Square. 2 bedrooms, lots of light, a real kitchen, a bathroom with a tub. I bought real food, fresh vegetables and fruit and meat. I bought a comfortable bed that didn't hurt my back. For the first time in months, I slept through the whole night. I gained back the weight I'd lost. My face filled out, got color back. When I looked in the mirror, I saw myself again. Not the broken, defeated woman I'd become, but Margaret, the real me. But here's the thing, my dear ones. Through all of this, through all the money and the comfort and the security, one thing haunted me. My daughters, Rebecca and Caroline. They had no idea what had happened to me. They still thought I was a poor old woman driving a car to survive. And part of me wanted to keep it that way. Part of me wanted to let them live in their ignorance. But I knew eventually I'd have to face them. Not for them, but for me. To close that chapter somehow. 6 weeks after everything was finalized, Caroline called me. First time in 5 months. Her voice sounded fake, forced. "Mom," she said. "How are you? We've been thinking about you." Lying, of course. If they'd been thinking about me, they would have called months ago. There was a long pause. Then she said, "Rebecca and I would like to take you to dinner. To talk. We feel bad about how things ended." My heart wanted to believe her, but my head knew better. I agreed to meet them. Chose a restaurant we used to go to when Thomas was alive, a little Italian place in South Philadelphia. When I arrived, they were already there. Both of them looked uncomfortable. We hugged awkwardly, sat down. The first few minutes were small talk. Weather, traffic, nothing important. Then Rebecca cleared her throat. "Mom," she said, "Caroline and I have been talking. We think maybe we were too harsh after Dad died. We know it's been hard for you." I waited. Caroline jumped in. "We want to help," she said. "We found a solution. Rebecca's neighbor has a garage apartment. It's small but it's clean. We can rent it for you for $60 a month. Wouldn't that be better than wherever you're living now?" $60. Like they were doing me some huge favor. "And," Rebecca added quickly, "you just need to help out sometimes. Light housework, maybe watch the kids occasionally. Nothing too hard." There it was. They wanted to turn me into their maid. Pay me $60 a month to live in a garage and take care of their children. I looked at both of them, saw their expectant faces. They thought they were being generous. They actually thought I should be grateful. I smiled. "That's very kind of you," I said calmly. "But I don't need your help. I'm doing fine where I am. Rebecca frowned. Mom, you can't be doing fine on Social Security. How are you even paying rent? I got lucky, I said simply. Things changed for me recently. What do you mean? Caroline asked suspiciously. So I told them about Harold Patterson, about Daniel, their grandfather they never knew, about the bar in 1955, the $25,000, the promise kept for 70 years, about the $28 million that was now mine. The silence that followed was deafening. Both my daughters stared at me with their mouths open. 28 million? Rebecca finally whispered. Yes, I said. And then like a switch had been flipped, everything changed. Rebecca leaned forward, eyes bright. Mom, this is incredible. This is a blessing for the whole family. We need to celebrate. We need to make plans. Caroline nodded enthusiastically. We should set up a family trust, Mom. We can help you manage everything. You shouldn't have to worry about any of this. I watched them talk faster and faster, making plans, calculating numbers in their heads, figuring out how much they could get. 5 minutes ago, they'd offered me a garage apartment for $60. Now they wanted to manage my fortune as one big happy family. I raised my hand. They stopped talking. Let me tell you something, I said, my voice steady. When you kicked me out 5 months ago, when you told me to find an apartment with my $300 check, when you abandoned me without looking back, I hit bottom. I lived in a terrible room that smelled like mold. I ate nothing but rice and beans for months. I drove strangers around for 12 hours a day just to survive. Mom, Rebecca tried to interrupt. Let me finish, I said firmly. In all those months you didn't call me once. Not once. Not even on your father's birthday. You erased me like I never existed. Like 32 years of marriage and raising you meant nothing. Caroline's eyes filled with tears. Fake tears. We're sorry, Mom, she said. We made mistakes. We're human. But we're family. Family forgives. I nodded slowly. You're right, I said. Family should forgive. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. And it doesn't mean giving you money. Rebecca's face went hard. That's not fair, she said, voice rising. We're your children. We have a right to part of that inheritance. No, I said calmly. You don't. The money is legally mine. My lawyers have made sure of that. You can try to sue if you want, but you'll lose. I stood up. Put money on the table for my meal that we never ordered. The door isn't closed forever, I said. If someday you show me with actions not words that you've changed, maybe we can rebuild something. But it will be on my terms. Not because I'm obligated. Not because of money. But because you genuinely want a relationship with your mother. I walked out of that restaurant. Didn't look back. Got in my car and drove to my beautiful apartment. And for the first time in months I felt free. That night I sat on my balcony, looked out at the Philadelphia skyline, held that photograph of Daniel and Harold from 1955, and I thought about everything that had happened, about loss and betrayal, about promises kept across decades, about how one act of kindness can ripple through time and change everything. I thought about Thomas. Wished so badly he could be there to see this. To know that his father had been a hero. To know that 70 years later that heroism had saved me. And I made a decision. I would use this money to honor both of them, Daniel and Thomas and Harold. I would create something good. So I started a foundation, the Daniel Hastings Foundation, dedicated to helping elderly people in crisis. People like I had been just months ago. Homeless, hopeless, abandoned. We give them housing, food, medical care. But most importantly, we give them dignity. Because I learned that losing your dignity hurts more than losing your money. Not all the money goes to the foundation. I live comfortably now. I travel sometimes, see places Thomas and I always talked about visiting. I eat well, sleep in a real bed, have friends. But a big portion goes to continuing the legacy that Daniel started 70 years ago in a bar, when he gave everything to save a stranger. So, my dear ones, why did I tell you this story today? Because I want you to know something important. If you're struggling right now, if you're alone, if you've been abandoned or forgotten, if you're barely surviving, don't give up. You never know when your life might change. You never know when a miracle might walk through your door. Daniel didn't know that his kindness in 1955 would save his daughter-in-law in 2024. He just did what was right. And that's all any of us can do. Do what's right. Help when you can. Keep your promises. Treat people with dignity. Because kindness never dies. It just waits for the perfect moment to bloom. Before I go, I want to ask you a few things. First, where are you watching from? What country, what state, what city? I love hearing from all of you. Second, have you ever experienced a miracle in your life? A moment when everything changed? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. Third, if this story touched your heart, if it gave you hope, would you do me a favor? Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to Grandma Margaret's channel. I'm here every week with stories about life, about loss, about hope, about second chances. Real stories from a real grandmother who's lived through it all. And remember, my dear ones, you are not alone. Even when it feels like the whole world has forgotten you, you are not alone. I see you. God sees you. And your story isn't over yet. Thank you for sitting with me today. Thank you for listening to my story. I'll see you next week with another tale from my long, strange, beautiful life. Until then, take care of yourselves. Be kind to others. And never ever give up hope. This is Grandma Margaret, sending you all my love. Goodbye for now, my dear children. Goodbye.